the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, and with horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries, and shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy, and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him.
The whirlwind, or tornadoes, are nature's most violent storms, capable of inflicting catastrophic destruction and obliterating entire neighborhoods in minutes. With winds exceeding 300 miles per hour, they carve a path of devastation, uprooting trees, demolishing buildings, and tossing vehicles like toys. Survivors describe the moments leading up to impact as an impending doom. The approaching tornado sounds like 1,000 freight trains converging, a roar that drowns out rational thought and instills fear. Then suddenly your ears pop as the air pressure around you drops, and then the realization sets in that you are in the path of the tornado, and that something catastrophic is about to take place. Inside the vortex of the tornado is an experience that survivors describe as supernatural chaos, a desolation that cannot be expressed in words.
Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Behold, evil shall go forth from nation to nation, and a great whirlwind shall be raised up from the coasts of the earth. And the slain of the Lord shall be at that day from one end of the earth even unto the other end of the earth.
So in the Bible, whirlwind is often used as an instrument of God's divine judgment, but it also has other meanings, as we're going to see in this video. So the Bible says, and at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north is the antichrist, shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. Now at the end of time, this king of the north character, the antichrist, is going to come against the world like a fierce storm or tornado. And it says that he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. Now, if you've ever watched a whirlwind or a tornado pass over something, anything that passes over, it completely destroys. So the whole world is going to be affected by this whirlwind storm. Now, the Bible is trying to warn us that a storm is coming. And, I live in LA, Lower Alabama. And when I find out a hurricane is coming, I want to start to prepare. I want to gather supplies and get ready for the storm. Now, I hope for the best, but I prepare for the worst. And when I was younger, I used to work at Home Depot and Lowe's, and I would see people come in at the last minute, right as the hurricane is about to make landfall, and they're trying to buy generators and boards to board up their windows, but everything was sold out. They waited too long. And I learned that it's best not to wait to the last minute to prepare for a storm. Now, the Bible is clear that this storm is headed our way. And this is going to be a great time of trouble. And you don't want to wait until the last minute to prepare for the storm. And speaking about this storm or this time of trouble, Ellen White, this great author, she said, "The time of trouble such as never was is soon to open upon us, and we shall need an experience which we do not now possess, and which many are too indolent to obtain. It is often the case that trouble is greater in anticipation than in reality, but this is not true of the crisis before us." So she's saying that the challenges we are about to face will be unlike anything that we've ever encountered before. And we need a level of preparedness and experience that most people are currently lacking. So I'm hoping to impress upon you the urgency of this event. Now, Daniel says, Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, that the king of the north comes like a whirlwind. So what is a whirlwind? Well, if you just Google that, you'll get this definition. A whirlwind is a rapidly rotating column of air like a dust devil or tornado that can range from small, short-lived phenomena to more powerful storms like hurricanes. It is also used metaphorically to describe anything characterized by rapid, chaotic, or forceful movement, such as a whirlwind of activity. So it's very interesting that the book of Daniel says the king of the north is coming against the world like a whirlwind, because some of the most destructive forces in nature are tornadoes and hurricanes. And if you've ever seen a tornado up close, you're kind of awestruck by the devastating power. You know, after one of these things passes by or passes through a neighborhood, it looks like a nuclear bomb went off. They are very destructive.
Caught on camera, incredible new video of Friday's powerful EF3 tornado touching down and then sweeping over the town of Andover, Kansas. Wind speeds hit 165 miles an hour and left a path of destruction nearly 13 miles long. More than 1,000 buildings were destroyed. Despite the widespread destruction, only 4 people, including 2 firefighters, were hurt, and they only had minor injuries.
So today we're going to be storm chasers, and we're going to investigate why God is using this symbol of the whirlwind to describe this conquering king of the north, which is the antichrist, in Daniel chapter 11, verses 40 through 45. And these last 5 verses in Daniel chapter 11 are the foundation to understand everything in the book of Revelation. And there are many Christians, Adventist Christians, who have misinterpreted these last 5 verses because they miss the meaning of the symbols, especially the symbolic meaning of the word whirlwind. Now, this series is called Pathway to Armageddon, and the first mention of the Battle of Armageddon, it starts in Daniel chapter 11, verses 40 through 45. And it's the king of the north, the Antichrist, and his army that wages war against God's people in the Battle of Armageddon. So to understand Armageddon, you really need to start with Daniel chapter 11, those last 5 verses. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with this chapter, it's covering all the previous prophecies found in the previous chapters of Daniel, and it's giving us more details. It uses the symbols of the king of the south and the king of the north fighting for control of the world, and it's basically describing the rise and fall of different empires throughout history. And those empires are described in Daniel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 7, and Daniel chapter 8. And then Daniel chapter 11 just gives us more detail, and the last 5 verses describe in detail what happens at the very end of time. And then the book of Revelation builds on that and repeats those last 5 verses. So it's very important to understand these 5 verses if you really want to understand the true meaning of the book of Revelation. Now, verse 40, it says, "And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, and with horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries, and shall overflow and pass over." Now, the king of the north has an army that encompasses land, air, and sea. This meaning that God's people are going to be completely surrounded. And we have a lot of symbols here that we need to interpret. We're going to be mostly in just Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, and it's filled with symbolic language. And so I want to start with who is the king of the north and who is the king of the south. Now remember, the book of Daniel is written in repeat and in large. And the king of the north in chapter 11 is the same as the little horn in Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 8. This is the power that arose after the fall of the Roman Empire. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time covering Daniel 2 and 7 because I have videos already on those chapters. You can go back and watch them. But here's a quick summary. Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7 describe 5 empires of history, which are Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and then the 5th empire is the Roman Catholic papacy. Daniel chapter 2 uses a statue of different metals to describe them. Daniel chapter 7 uses 4 beasts to describe those same empires. And out of the 4th beast, Daniel sees a little horn arise, which is the antichrist. And this is the same as the king of the north in Daniel chapter 11. And just so you know, all the Protestant reformers were in agreement on the identity of these empires. This is not a new interpretation. Martin Luther, William Tyndale, John and Charles Wesley, who started the Methodist Church, the Matthew Henry Bible Commentary, Charles Spurgeon, also all of the scholars who translated the King James Bible, and many other great Protestant theologians all agree that the Roman Catholic papacy is the little horn that arose out of the Roman Empire and ruled over Europe for 1260 years, just as the book of Daniel predicted. Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, describes the Catholic papacy during the Dark Ages like this.
And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until the time and times and the dividing of time.
So let's break down this verse in Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. I just want to show you how accurately it describes the Catholic papacy during the Dark Ages. I'm going to do this very quickly. It says, and he shall speak great words against the Most High. Revelation 13 says he speaks blasphemy. So the Pope calls himself the Vicar of Christ, meaning in place of Christ, vicarius filii Dei. He also calls himself Holy Father, which is a title for only God the Father. Now, here's a quote from the Catholic Encyclopedia. It says, the Pope is of so great dignity and so exalted that he is not a mere man, but as it were, God, the Vicar of God. The Pope is, as it were, God on earth, sole sovereign of the faithful of Christ, chief King of Kings. They're calling him the King of Kings, a title only for Jesus. The Pope is of so great authority and power that he can modify, explain, or interpret even divine laws. They're claiming he can change God's laws. Now, the verse says, he shall wear out the saints of the Most High. So the papacy persecuted God's people, even outlawed the Bible during the Dark Ages. And here's a quote from W.E.H. Lecky. He said this in his book. The Church of Rome has shed more innocent blood than any other institution that has ever existed among mankind, and will be questioned by no Protestant who has a complete knowledge of history, end quote. So it's estimated that millions of Christians, some people put the estimate at 50 million Christians, were murdered by the Catholic Church during the Dark Ages. And you can read about this in Fox's Book of Martyrs. Now, the verse says, he thinks to change times and laws. Now, during the Dark Ages, the papacy changed God's 10 commandments by getting rid of the second commandment. Now, you can see this if you go to a Catholic encyclopedia or catechism. Their laws are different than the laws, the 10 commandments that are in the Bible. They got rid of the second commandment about idolatry, and then they changed the seventh-day Sabbath, the fourth commandment, from the seventh day, which is Saturday, to the first day of the week, which is Sunday. And the papacy admits to the change. And so because they removed one of the laws, they took the 10th commandment, which is about coveting, and they broke that into 2 commandments. They made the 10th commandment 2 commandments. Now, here's a quote from the Catholic Council of Trent. It says, talking about the change of Sabbath, it pleased the Church of God that religious celebration of the Sabbath day should be transferred to the Lord's day. They're talking about Sunday. For as on that day, light first shone on the world. Now, I'll have more on the changing of the Sabbath later in the series, but for now, I just want to remind the viewer that God wrote the Ten Commandments himself on stone tablets with his own finger. So for any man to claim that he can change God's laws is blasphemous. Now, then the verse says, they shall be given into his hand, talking about God's people, they, until a time, times, and a dividing of time. Now that is 3.5 years or 1,260 days. But in Bible prophecy, a day equals a year. And we know that from numerous verses, and this is what all the Protestant reformers believed. Ezekiel 4:6 says, and thou shalt bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. I have appointed thee each day for a year. Numbers 14:34. After the number of the days in which you search the land, even 40 days, each day for a year, shall you bear your iniquities, even 40 years. So this 1,260 days in Daniel is actually 1,260 years. And we know this is accurate because that's exactly how long the papacy ruled over Europe, from 538 AD until 1798. So it matches perfectly. Now, when you get to Daniel chapter 11, it repeats those 5 empires from Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7, which is Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and then the Roman Catholic papacy. And when you're in Daniel chapter 11, verses 23 through 45, that's where it transitions. It starts talking about the Roman Catholic papacy, and it now calls him the King of the North. So the King of the North, at the end of time, is the Roman Catholic papacy, the antichrist. But I'm going to show you something that most Adventist Christians miss, which is there's another power that's described in those verses, and it's described through symbolic language, and that's where that word, the whirlwind, comes in. I'll explain that in just a few moments. Now, Daniel 11:40 says, the king of the south shall push at the king of the north at the time of the end. So to identify the king of the south in these verses, we need to just ask the question, who pushed at the Catholic papacy at the time of the end? Well, the answer is very simple. What it's referring to is during the French Revolution, which was an atheistic movement, Napoleon's general Berthier, he marched into Rome and he took the Pope into captivity in 1798. So that means the time of the end began in 1798 at the end of that 1,260-year period, and the power that pushed at the Pope was atheism. So that means the King of the South represents atheism, or really anyone who is against the Bible. So you could actually include Muslims or Buddhists or Hindus, anyone who doesn't accept the authority of the Bible. So the King of the South, by the way, is still pushing at this King of the North. And I believe we're going to see a massive push here at the end of time, and then the King of the North is going to respond. Now, so what many people overlook in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, is that yes, the papacy is identified, but there's a transition that takes place in the middle of the verses that starts to describe the power behind the papacy. So that's my next question. Who gave the papacy his authority?
Revelation 13. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his seat and great authority.
Revelation 13:2 says, the dragon, which is Satan, gave the papacy his power, his seat, and great authority. So Satan is actually the power behind the papacy. So I want to take a look at a famous chapter in the Bible, which is about Satan or Lucifer. And it's Isaiah chapter 14. And the reason I want to look at it is because it uses a symbol that is found in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40.
How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High.
So notice that Isaiah says Lucifer wants to sit on the sides of the north. Now, why would Lucifer want to sit on the sides of the north? Or as the New King James says, on the farthest sides of the north. Now, that word, the north, or king of the north, it's symbolic. It has symbolic meaning. So the question is, why would Satan want to sit on the sides of the north? And the answer is because the Bible says that Jesus is the true king of the north. And it says this in Psalm 48:2, beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great king. Okay, so Jesus is the great king, and he is the true king of the north. But Satan wants to usurp that authority, and he wants to sit on the mount of the congregation as a false Christ. Okay, that's what this is all about, is Satan taking worship that is due to Christ. Now remember, and he's going to do this by appearing as a false Christ. Remember, that's what Jesus warned us about 4 times in Matthew 24. He said, then if any man shall say unto you, lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. This is a very powerful delusion. And Jesus referred to this event that I just read to you. He called it the abomination of desolation. And he said to understand it, you must go to Daniel the prophet. He says, spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Well, where this is spoken of is actually in 3 different places. I'm going to cover that a little later, but what we're focusing on right now is the end time application. So the end time application for the abomination of desolation, the appearance of this false Christ, is in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40 through 45. And it's describing, in that verse, it starts out talking about the Catholic papacy, okay? Many Adventists, they understand that part, but they don't understand it then transitions and it starts to describe the power that is behind the Catholic papacy, which is Satan, and Satan appearing as a false Christ. Now, while we're in Isaiah, I want to show you something else, which is at the beginning of the chapter. It starts out talking about the king of Babylon. Well, then in the middle of the verses, it switches and it starts talking about the power behind the king of Babylon, which is Satan. It says, take up a proverb against the king of Babylon. Well, then in the middle of the verses, it starts to describe the power behind the king of Babylon. And this has confused theologians over the years. Some theologians, they believe, no, this chapter is only about the king of Babylon. But what's going on here is God is lifting the curtain and he's showing us who is the power behind the king of Babylon. Now, this happens again in Ezekiel chapter 28. This is another famous chapter about Satan. But it starts out at the beginning of the chapter, Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyrus. Well, then in the middle of the verses, it starts describing the power behind the king of Tyre, which is Satan. It says, thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Thou art the anointed cherubim. Well, we know the king of Tyre is not an anointed cherubim. Those were the angels who were at the throne of God. They guarded the throne of God. So we know this is talking about Satan. And the same thing, the reason I bring this up is because the same thing happens in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40. It starts out talking about the Catholic papacy as the king of the north. But in the middle of the verses, a shift takes place, and it starts to describe the power that is behind the papacy, which is Satan. And it begins describing how Satan is going to appear as a false Christ. And it does this transition through symbols. And because many people have missed the meaning of the symbols, they miss that transition. And there are many Adventist theologians who today, they say, no, these verses are only talking about the papacy. Well, what happens when you do that is that it causes you to miss other things that are going on in the book of Revelation. These 5 verses are the foundation to understand Revelation, also to understand the abomination of desolation that Jesus was talking about. Now, the primary symbol that lets us know that a transition is taking place is the word whirlwind. And it says, here's the verse again, at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind. So the king of the north shall come like a whirlwind. So what does that word mean? Well, it has a few different symbolic meanings in the Old Testament. The primary meaning was the presence of God. In the Old Testament, whirlwind is a symbol for the presence of God or the appearance of God. Here's a verse for that. Ezekiel chapter 1. This is a famous chapter where Ezekiel sees a vision of God. Verse 1, it says, then the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. So we know he's seeing a vision of God. Verse 4, and I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north. So in the Bible, whirlwind and the north are both symbols, and they're both connected to the presence of God. So we got 2 words there that are from Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, and they're both connected to the appearance of God. Here's another one. Isaiah chapter 66, verse 15. It's talking about the second coming of Jesus Christ, and it says that Jesus will come like a whirlwind. Here's the verse. For behold, the Lord will come with fire, and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger with fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. So Jesus is coming to earth like a whirlwind. And then I want you to notice the second word that I highlighted in green. It says with chariots, that Jesus is coming like a whirlwind with chariots. Now, the reason I highlighted that is because that word is also used in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40. So the question would be, does Jesus come to earth with literal chariots? Is he coming on chariots and horses? Or is that word symbolic? And the answer is the word is symbolic. It's talking about angels. Jesus comes back to earth with all of his angels. But notice that Jesus is coming like a whirlwind to render his anger with fury and his rebuke with flames of fire. So the word whirlwind not only represents the divine presence of Jesus Christ, but it also represents his judgment. So there's 2 meanings there. Represents divine presence, also represents judgment. Now, I want to look at the word chariots and horsemen, and then we're going to wrap this up. Okay, but there's more in the, I wanted to cover more, but we just didn't get to it. So what are the chariots and horsemen that are described in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40? It says, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots and with horsemen. Now notice the king of the north, he comes the same way that Isaiah described Jesus coming the second time. And the reason is because the king of the north in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, is a false Christ. Okay, this is how we know this is more than just the papacy. But Daniel 11:40, it starts out talking about the papacy, but in the middle of the verses, a transition takes place, just like what we saw in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel chapter 28. It starts out talking about the papacy, and then it transitions to talking about the power behind the papacy coming as a false Christ. So the words chariots and horsemen are also symbolic. Okay, so the king of the north comes like a whirlwind with chariots and horsemen. So what does the chariots and horsemen represent? I've already kind of told you. In Isaiah 66, verse 15, it described Jesus coming back with chariots. Psalm 68, 17, it tells us what the chariots are. The chariots of God are 20,000, even thousands of angels. So chariots in the Bible, that word is symbolic for God's angels. It's not literal chariots. It's just a symbol for angels. Here's another one. And it does this in multiple places. I'm just going to give you a couple. When Elijah was taken up to heaven, it described him being taken up to heaven by chariots of fire and horses of fire. Here's the verse. Behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and parted them both asunder, and Elijah went up to heaven by a whirlwind into heaven. Okay, so Elijah also, that word whirlwind appears because this is the presence of God, and he's taken Elijah up to heaven. And what took Elijah up to heaven were angels. But it describes those angels as chariots of fire and horses of fire. So in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, when the king of the north comes with like a whirlwind with chariots and horsemen, these are symbols for angels. But Satan will come with evil angels. He's not coming with the good angels. He's coming with the evil angels, and they're going to be pretending to be good angels, and this is going to be a counterfeit second coming of Christ. Okay, and it's going to catch the whole world by surprise. So in closing, let's finish with the word, the symbol whirlwind. I'm going to move kind of quickly because I'm trying to keep this at a certain time. In Job 38:1, it says, "Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind." So the word whirlwind, it relates to the manifestation of God. But in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, it's describing a counterfeit manifestation. So basically, the word whirlwind is kind of a medium through which God reveals himself and communicates with humanity. You know, God spoke to Job out of the whirlwind. When Ezekiel saw his vision of God, he saw a whirlwind from the north. Isaiah says the second coming of Christ, that Jesus will come like a whirlwind. So when people see tornadoes up close, they usually become paralyzed with fear, or they're awestruck by its beauty and its power. You know, meteorologists, they still don't understand exactly how tornadoes are formed. They understand the conditions that cause them, but they don't understand why one is more powerful than the other, and why one will go longer than another one. And especially, you know, an EF5, when you see one of those, it's very powerful and it's very loud. It has a roar about it, and it just destroys everything in its path. You know, I believe that America, the reason America sees more tornadoes than any other country in the world is because God is sending us a warning. When this King of the North character comes like a whirlwind, America is going to be the primary location for these end time events. Now, I also know that from Revelation chapter 13. And in future episodes, we're going to compare Revelation 13 and Daniel 11, 40 through 45. Now, not only does the whirlwind, it represents the presence of God, but it's also symbolic of his swift divine judgment. So it also means judgment. Now, what God is telling us through the symbolism of the whirlwind is that there's going to be two whirlwinds at the end of time. There are two times of trouble. The first time of trouble is when Satan comes as a whirlwind, pretending to be Christ, and there's going to be great confusion and chaos in the world like we've never seen before. And there's going to be a persecution of God's true people because they're going to be saying, hey, that's not Jesus, that's a counterfeit. And that's going to cause them to be persecuted. Also, this false Christ is going to set up a counterfeit day of worship as a test to see who his true believers are. And then he's going to set up a kingdom at the end of time, which is the New World Order. And I know that from Daniel 11:45, also verses in Revelation. It says, "And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Now, then because of this persecution of God's people and the setting up of this kingdom, which is what Jesus called the abomination of desolation, God is going to pronounce the final judgment on the world. And the true whirlwind will begin. That's the big time of trouble. That's when the 7 last plagues fall. Okay, that's in Revelation chapter 16 when Michael stands up. And here's that verse, Daniel 12:1. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince was standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. So remember, there are 2 whirlwinds. Satan comes as the first whirlwind, and then Jesus comes as the real whirlwind, the final storm. Okay, so the second coming of Christ is the true whirlwind. Jeremiah says, speaking about the final whirlwind, the big time of trouble, he says this, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Behold, evil shall go forth from nation to nation, and a great whirlwind shall be raised up from the coast of the earth. And the slain of the Lord shall be at that day from one end of the earth even unto the other end of the earth. They shall not be lamented, neither gathered nor buried. They shall be as dung upon the ground. The reason no one's there to gather or bury them is because this is the second coming of Christ. Christ will take his people to heaven. So that verse is describing what happens to the wicked at the second coming. Now, there's much more I wanted to cover. So check back for the next episode of Pathway to Armageddon. And we're going to continue on this study of Daniel 11:40 through 45. And we're going to be also going to the book of Revelation. Thank you so much for watching. God bless.
Behold, the whirlwind of the Lord goeth forth with fury, a continuing whirlwind. It shall fall with pain upon the head of the wicked. The fierce anger of the Lord shall not return until he have done it, and until he have performed the intents of his heart. In the latter days ye shall consider it.